Everyone loves using the graveyard as a resource, but this flashback precon has seen better days. After some deep analysis, the Guardian Project podcast has decided to faithfully mend this busted deck.
So you want to be a player, but your cards are a wreck. You gotta hit us up to get a pimped out deck.
You got to pimp my deck.
Damn right.
You got to pimp my deck.
My name is Andy, and I'm a 33-year-old podcaster from Baltimore, Maryland, and this is my Savin the Chronoclasm Commander deck. It started as a pre-con, but I've made a couple of pretty spicy modifications myself.
Andy barely plays Commander and he has no idea what he's doing. He put Harness the Storm in the deck. I'm not even sure he knows it's Singleton.
I didn't think I needed sleeves, but one time I was eating a big bowl of spaghetti while playing, and someone cast an overloaded Cyclonic Rift while my mouth was full, and I spitted spaghetti all over my deck.
It's honestly really sad and embarrassing. No one at the local game store wants to play with him because his deck smells like spaghetti sauce.
I know my deck isn't the best, but it's probably still a 7 out of 10. But who has money to spend on all these fancy new cards?
Andy has no money because he doesn't have a job. He keeps saying he's a podcaster, but he makes literally no money from doing that.
So please, Guardian Project Podcast, pimp my deck.
Please, pimp Andy's deck.
Let's go tell Andy we're about to pimp his deck.
Yes! Yes!
Yeah, buddy. You know what I'm here to do.
Oh my God, it's the Guardian Project Podcast! Yeah!
Okay, calm down. Let me see this deck of yours. Go get it.
Ooh, okay. Ooh, here you go. Ooh, calm down.
Is this whole deck sleeved in penny sleeves?
Well, they told me I needed sleeves. I mean, they're sleeves, right? What's the difference?
Didn't this precon come with a soul ring?
I
don't see it in here.
I lost the soul ring.
Do you even have a win condition in here?
Yeah, I mean, there's Storm Herd is in there. That counts.
Okay, this is pretty rough. We're gonna let the boys at the Guardian Project Podcast work their magic. When we got this deck from you, it was a mess. But we called in the heroic reinforcements from the Guardian Project Podcast to make Andy the envy of the pod. So Andy, check out your new Commander deck.
What? Oh, what? Oh my God! This is my deck. This is my
set you
deck.
up with the best of the best: Kaladesh Invention Mana Rocks, Showcase Foils, and APAC Basic Lands.
I can't believe it, man. It's so thick.
Yep, that's quadruple sleeved. No more spaghetti damage here.
Oh yeah, I need that.
Check out this Smothering Tithe. You'll have so much mana you can overload this borderless Cyclonic Rift with treasure to spare.
Ooh, so rude. I loved it. Okay, so how good is this deck now? Like, if I'm having Rule Zero conversations, 1 to 10, where am I at?
It's about a 7.
Probably a 7.
Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I am your host, Andy. I'm here, as always, with my number one co-host, Anthony, guy who builds a new green-white commander deck, says, I only want to play this deck one time, then proceeds to play it no less than 4 times in a 24-hour period. Maddox.
I was correct. I only should have played it one time. I made someone very unhappy, and I feel bad about it.
Oh, no. You did a bad Rule Zero?
I did a pub stomp, I think. Is that what pub stomping is?
What happened? What'd you do?
I played the deck. It did a what do you call it? A Genesis wave, the big one. And my opponents were like, I'm just playing a precon. Who the are you?
Yeah, well, I mean, why were you doing that against
That's a great
precon?
That's a great question. I was very excited to play Commander with my good friend Daniel and some other people that I hadn't met before.
Yeah,
I should have had a bigger conversation with them.
This was an LGS game with some strangers, which to me is the most volatile kind of Commander game.
It's challenging.
Yeah, you got to have those conversations the right way. And, we're not experts in those conversations, Anthony, because we don't play that much Commander.
True.
So, if we're going to talk about Commander on this episode, which we are, I think we should bring in some experts. We are joined by two very special guests. We are joined by Andy and Mike from the Guardian Project podcast, which is a podcast about Magic the Gathering, but mostly Commander. Andy and Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having us.
We're excited to talk about this because, listeners to our show might not know that Anthony and I got into Magic by playing Commander. As far as I can tell, if you started playing Magic after, let's say, 2015?
That's exactly the year I was going to say.
Then you pretty much got into Magic playing Commander. Before that, it could have been something else. Maybe you were really into Standard. Maybe you were really into some other kind of format. But we got into Magic playing Commander. We now, as our listeners know, talk mostly about Cube, but Commander is our first love in Magic, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty common thing to hear that, but I would say that both of Andy and I didn't get into Magic via Commander, which is pretty
real.
Interesting.
Yeah, I got into it in 2012 playing tabletop Magic with my husband and his friends, and I did not like the game. They gave me a mono red deck, and I said, "This isn't fun." I
would love to take a poll of how many people loved Magic at first experience, and how many people were like, "This is terrible," and then kind of came back to it.
Yeah. We couldn't play Catan one more time because if someone didn't give me bricks or friggin' grains or whatever it is that I needed, I was
gonna flip the table.
So they're like, okay, let's try Dominion. So then we were doing some deck building games. And they finally said, no, you got to learn how to play Magic. And at the time, I was like, I don't know if I really have it in me to learn this. And
that is a very fair response to the prospect of learning to play Magic, especially if you're learning from very enfranchised players. Like, my wife plays a bit of Magic, but her response has always been like, she looks at me and how much it consumes my entire life and is my number one and only hobby I really care about. And she's like, well, surely in order to play this game, I must be like you. And that is, of course, not the case. But it's very intimidating if you have players that are very invested and you're trying to learn from them.
Right. I mean, you can look at Dominion and be like, that could be a fun experience. But you look at how invested you are and be like, that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And then, Mike, you started playing because some of your students that you mentor wanted you to be able to play with them, or you wanted to be able to play with them more. And we randomly met at an LGS offhand.
Yep. Yeah. So I started in the release of Amonkhet. So in 2017 is when I started.
That's relatively recent.
That's when I started playing Magic completely. I had never played Magic before then. And one of my students was like, you should learn how to play Magic because we're taking a bus ride to St. Louis from Southeast Michigan, and we might as well do something on the way. So I learned how to play Magic, and I did Standard, and I saw Andy at an LGS, and we had met one time before then, maybe twice, but one time for sure, and it was at a mutual friend's wedding. Andy's best friend and one of my brothers from my fraternity happened to be the same person. So
there you go.
Small world, and here we are with a Magic podcast.
Time moves quick, I guess. You said you learned with Amonkhet, and my immediate response was, "Oh, that was relatively recently." And then you were like, "It was 5 years ago." And I'm like, "Oh crap, that was 5 years ago." Oh, geez, that's a little bit nerve wracking. So we wanted to have you on the show because we've always felt really strongly that Cube, the primary format we talk about, and Commander have so much in common. And I listened to your show, specifically the first episode of your podcast I listened to was your end of the year recap for 2021. You both track all of your Commander games you play throughout the entire year, the outcome of the games, other various data points that you kind of keep track of, which is very much obviously in our oeuvre of data analysis and Magic. But I was so fascinated to hear you talk about Commander and basically talk about the tuning of your decks down to aiming for roughly a 25% win percentage, right? Because you're like, well, if there's 4 players in every pod and we're all trying to play a game for everyone to have fun, then I shouldn't win more than 25% of the time, because if I am, then something's a little bit out of whack. And it really just struck me that, for all the things that Commander and Cube have in common, which we talked about a lot on this show, just the fact that you can play whatever cards you want, you have a lot of flexibility, you can make any card viable, you get to really kind of craft the experience you want. This was one of the only times I'd ever heard anybody outside of the context of Cube talk about specifically powering down their environment, right? Because if you talk about Magic more broadly, you're talking about constructed or limited. The goal is always to win. It's always to make your deck better. It's always about optimizing. And that's what the game kind of is. And to hear people talk very concretely and be very invested in Commander and also talk about hey, we should make our decks less good because right now they're a little bit too tuned up for the environments we're playing in, was just really revelatory for me. And so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about just your approach to Commander and how you approach the format.
I mean, if I could add just a tiny little bit to that, I would say it's really awesome to hear you guys talk about still optimizing the format, but optimizing not for win percentage, but optimizing for having everyone have a good time.
That's a much better way to put it.
Yeah, it's considered a social format, right? So first and foremost, and I think randomly on Twitter a few years ago, there were some folks that were tracking their Commander games, and I said, oh, I kind of want to track my Commander games. So I tracked mine in 2020, and then both of us tracked all of our games for 2021, and now we're just going to continue tracking. Seeing as it's a social format, and you are largely playing with strangers when you're at an LGS, or you're playing with a pretty consistent play group outside of the LGS, it's easier when you're playing with your friends and you say, man, this deck is just miserable to play against, or you're playing the same thing every time, or it's too consistent. Can you like either switch your deck,
right?
Or
You
maybe
just go, Mike, stop it.
Yeah,
just stop it,
or
Mike.
just change it up. And so we want to make sure that everybody's having a good time, which is it's difficult because we're very into constantly tweaking our decks and upgrading them. Every new set that comes out, we have full threads, full episodes on what we added to decks, what we're going to put into decks, why we think it's better than what's already in the deck. But at the same time, is it making it so that people aren't having fun and that now I'm winning 40% or 60% or 70% of every game that I play with this deck? And that's really why we started tracking our games, is we've been able to say, okay, this deck is not doing well. I can clearly up the power level, or this deck is really doing a pub stomp, as we said earlier on the show. I need to not do a pub stomp anymore. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I think it's very interesting that, when we say we're aiming for a 25% win rate, we're not throwing games or anything in order to try to get that 25%. We are actively trying to win every game and still aiming to lose 3 of every 4 games. But because
which does sound probably to some people like a contradiction, right? But it's definitely not. Like, you have these two different goals, right? You're sitting down to play. You want the deck to work as well as it can. You're not going to throw or just, intentionally take the wrong line or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then also in the meta game, when you're building the deck and crafting it, and when you're having your Rule Zero conversations and trying to establish what the overall vibe of the table is going to be, then you are trying to basically kind of undermine your winning there, right? Or at least like balance things out so that, again, like Anthony said, you're optimizing for a good experience for all involved rather than optimizing for winning the most games possible, which is in the DNA of so much talk about Magic, right? Before Commander became a thing and there was this explosion in Commander content, the only Magic content available was pros telling you how to win more, pretty much, right? Like, that's what Magic content was. Yep. And so we're kind of in, to me, like a little bit of a new frontier of like, how do we talk about this game where so embedded in the DNA of how we talk about it is the constant optimization of winning. How do we like learn a new language to like talk about the game in a way where we're actually just trying to make everyone have a good time, which is also exactly what we do in Cube Design.
That's a super interesting point, and I feel like you're totally right that is embedded in the way that we judge people and evaluate, like, who are the important people in our community is who are the best players. But that's not why I play Magic. I play like that. So I was watching The Next Generation again, as I often do.
Hooray!
And I was watching an episode with the Klingons and their whole society based on, the people that are in charge are the best warriors. And it's like, that's not what your society needs to be about. Like, you also need people that are good leaders. So why are you only evaluating the people that are the best warriors? And I feel like that is a little bit the way that we judge people in Magic. But I want to value all the people that are good at so many different aspects of the game, which is the people that are good at having a good time.
So Paulo Vitor Domodorosa's Twitter following is just like, I wish I could pull the name of the Klingon leader right now.
Galron.
Galron, thank you. I'm so mad at myself. It's just like Galron.
I mean, it depends which period of the Klingon Empire
PBDDR is just the Galron of Magic, is what you're saying.
Well, but no, Galron is interesting because he is actually a very smart, sort of different character.
Okay, well, you undermined your whole thing then. But no, I think that's a really good point. And, it's a lot of that is tied up in just kind of like the economics of it, right? Like, pro players make money playing the game, they get sponsors, and the sponsors pay them to have visibility, and so they basically get paid to make content, or the model has been that for a long time. Now we see enough people generating audiences of reasonable sizes, specifically with Commander content, game nights and all of the YouTube channels that have followed in their footsteps, where now there's like a real market for playing the game a very different way, which, even though I'm not like deeply invested in Commander, that is very exciting to me that there is a big energy where we're talking about playing Magic differently and valuing different things.
Yeah, there's a huge swath of shows that are out there now, and we've got it, the range from very, very casual intro. I'm learning how to play Commander right now, which is the most difficult format to learn how to play this game. Because
allow me to introduce you to Cube if you think Commander's the worst way to learn to play Magic.
Okay, Cube might be a bit more difficult, yes, to learn because you're throwing draft in immediately. All the way up to very, very competitive shows that focus on how to play competitive Commander or CEDH, which is a whole nother thing. It's all on its own, and
a whole Pandora's box of many combos
of cards you look at and you go, I don't know why this is good, but it's here. And then you read their primer and you realize it's good for the one interaction, for the one corner case, but apparently it's in the meta, so I understand. So it's crazy because it's a format that doesn't have a consistent meta. It's got very popular commanders that are easy to build around that come in Commander precons, but it's changing rapidly, and with the number of legendary creatures released every set that's coming out, it's hard to predict what is going to be the best. So we're kind of learning to just kind of build for all occasions.
Yeah, and even building for entertainment purposes, like we talked about some content, the big content creators going on. If you're not in the competitive, you want to have big plays and fun interactions and these new commanders and new cards. But aimly, you don't want to have someone sit through a 3-hour slugfest of the exact same commanders. So even on top of the whole deck building, when you're trying to get a 25% win, we're also trying to aim for games that are an hour to an hour and a half long. And you can achieve that with many, many different power levels. But just to have, some interactions, a lot of control decks maybe would have the games go on longer.
Wow, what are you trying to say?
I'm not. I don't even remember the last time I played against one of your control decks, Andy. If I'm being 100% honest,
I don't play them very often anymore. And I think to add to what you were saying as well, we also make a lot of new decks because we stream occasionally and we want to show off new things. And it's hard to regulate a deck when you're constantly building a new one and you're not tuning that deck because you might not have fallen in love with it and it didn't fall into your core group of decks that are going to exist for the next few years.
Yeah, I always have the inclination to take a deck apart and put another deck together because I can't have more than one Abzan deck. That would be crazy. So I have to
it just costs so much money for the mana base is my experience.
For sure.
It's like I have one Abzan mana base, so I can have the one deck at any one time. It is my experience playing Commander.
Yep,
exactly.
Accurate.
So I really want to dig in more to this idea of tuning for that 25%. So you all have experience doing this. Obviously, you've been tracking hundreds and hundreds of Commander games you've played. What does that usually practically mean for you? Does it mean cutting 2-card combos? Does it mean just excluding some of the most powerful staples of the format, like your Soul Rings and your Cyclonic Rifts in certain instances? What actually does it mean to tune your decks to like a 25% win percentage, very practically speaking?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with removing some fast mana. Fast mana tends to be what makes a deck more and more competitive, what makes it faster, what makes you allowed to do your stuff more. That being said, I don't think we've ever taken Soul Ring out of a deck for that. It's mostly the
whoa.
That's the most broken one.
It sure is. But the fact that it only produces colorless makes it okay.
I've never heard someone criticize Soul Ring in such a way.
That is not true. You absolutely have heard that because we've talked about Soul Ring in the context of the 1-drop cube. And also in the context of the Degenerate Micro Cube.
And in the Turbo Cube.
And in the Turbo Cube. We have 3 cubes where Soul Ring is way below what people might expect in terms of power level because you just don't have that many places to use generic mana.
All right. Great. Soul Ring overrated continues. Sorry for the interruption.
Well, you also have the fact that you can only play 1 copy of Soul Ring. So it's in the 99. You might not ever see it. You might see it on turn 10 where it really, okay, sure, it nets you 1 mana, but is it really all that much better than a 3 visits or some other card that's just going to get you an untapped land? But when you start throwing in consistency of playing all 10 talismans and all 10 signets at the 2 mana drop, now all of a sudden you have 21 pieces of fast artifact ramp in your 5-color deck, and now you can pump things out a lot faster. And even on top of that, you mentioned combo pieces. Sure, we might stay away from 2-card combos. Maybe we won't. Specifically, maybe 2-card combos that include your commander might be a little too fast for what we're aiming for, unless you're playing in that format. Because if you are playing a more competitive format, as long as you have a good conversation, a pregame conversation about where the game needs to end at, how long, how many turns, and that kind of stuff, you could still have the fast mana in there, but I think taking out tutors has helped us a lot in tuning down decks too, because if we do play combo decks, then it forces us to have to just naturally draw into those combos rather than picking them out on turn 6 and say, I'm ending the game on turn 7.
Yeah, and we can't, I don't think that we would say that we remove all of them. I think we might just make it so that it's less consistent. So I will still play tutors. I will still play 2-card combos that one of them involves my commander, like the Locust God and Sage of the Falls, and just conveniently having one of the old Eldrazi that shuffle my library back in. I mean, sure, those will still exist, but when I have that chat and I let people know, well, when I play the Locust God, the game will likely go for 1 hour and it will likely be over by turn 8. Like that's when we usually are seeing that. And I think removing things that are maybe problematic for our opponents. Like, we don't really play decks that have cards like Stasis or Winter Orb. We're not trying to slow the game down to a screeching halt in Commander. It's not really something that we enjoy having done to us, so we have learned to not do it to others. We've gotten to try it, though. I mean, you got to try it to say you've done it.
For sure.
And then,
you have to taste the dark side, You have to just know what it feels like.
Exactly.
And then you can hang it up and never do it again. Or you can feel that siren song. You can just feel the pull.
You can. We always preach that you need to have a way to end the game if you're going to turn 12 and you're like 2 hours deep in a game, and that's not our preferred length time frame of a game. We are definitely, I think, and I'm not going to just speak for Mike, but we're around we'd like it to be an hour 15, hour and a half ish max. Maybe we can go till turn 10. You really have to prep for those games that go really far. So I wouldn't say we're on the competitive end, but I would say that we're definitely not aiming for the pre-con level. So it's been interesting making sure that we have pre-game chats to establish the right power level, which I think we've really started to become successful with, at least with our local play group. It's always hit or miss with the public.
I definitely want to get into those pre-game chats in a second, but I have a couple more questions about this particular aspect. You mentioned that, you're kind of aiming for a similar power level. Is it that most of the decks you have in your stable are floating around this power level so that you can always kind of build an ad hoc pod of whatever decks anybody has? Or do each of you have a wide range of power levels of decks you have access to?
I think I speak for every Commander player on the planet when I say all of my decks are power level 7.
Yeah, that's been my experience too.
No, but we definitely have various powers, but in our decks, but they're not necessarily tied to these specific cards, specific permanents, specific combos, but more to the theme of the deck and how the theme runs. And honestly, I didn't really see what power level my decks were until I did start reviewing my end of year statistics for Commander tracking, because I could see my for instance, my Vega the Watcher deck from Kaldheim cares about casting spells from anywhere but your hand, and I just have it's like a blue-white kind of control prowess deck, and I always thought the deck was really cool. It did a lot of fun interactions. I never didn't have fun playing the deck. It has literally never won a game in its entire existence.
And then on the opposite end, there's a mono red commander, Rionia Fire Dancer, which came out with Strixhaven Commander, which is it makes tokens of creatures you have when you go to combat for each instant or sorcery you've cast this turn. So you're looking to make it with just a bunch of cool enter the battlefield ability red creatures, and I built it a little too strong, and it was winning 70% of its games last year.
That's quite a bit higher than 25%, Andy. You're in the you're in the penalty box. Go to the sin bin.
Yes, and then looking at that after we tracked it, I was able to start seeing when the win rate went down, because I removed things like fast mana, because I was worried, well, the commander already costs 5. If someone removes it, it costs 7. The deck is 100% focused on this commander, so I need to make sure that I can cast it again once or twice. So I'm very fortunate to have some copies of some old cards that I was able to purchase when they were more affordable. I have a Grim Monolith. I do have a Mana Crypt. And so I go, well, I have them. Let's see if they work. And it turns out they're just too good.
Let's see if they work. You think Mana Crypt's any good? Let's give it a shot in this 40 life format. I don't know.
Turns out it was too good for getting me out the gate. And I probably should not have had that additional mana until way later in the game. So removing those changed it.
there's a very clear solution to me here, which is that you clearly need to give a nice gift to your friend Mike of a Mana Crypt and a Grim Monolith so he can put it in his Owl EDH deck and just bring all these
That's the problem
blue
with owls.
percentages
They just
down
need
to
Mana Crypts.
a nice even balance.
Owls just need crypts. That's what we've learned.
It's true.
So it's been wild, but we didn't know a lot about our decks until we started tracking it. And I think this is true for many, that it's once you're done with the game, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And you only recognize when you don't like playing against a commander when you've lost to it a lot. So I wouldn't say Sidisi Undead Vizier, which is the mono black Sidisi that has exploit from Dragons. I think it's Dragons of Tarkir. I wouldn't say it's a particularly busted commander by any stretch. But Mike used to have one, and you would tutor for a Cabal Coffers and an Urborg, and then we would always lose to Torment of Hailfire.
Yeah. I was going to say it if you weren't going to. I knew what that was card was going to be. There's no question.
And after losing to that, and it's not even exaggeration. After losing to it, maybe like the 7th or 8th time, we were like, "Hey, can we stop?" Actually, and so Mike changed
do we
it
play
up.
this game for fun? Because I'm starting to lose sight of what we do this game for.
Exactly, and so I think that a lot of people that don't track only associate really negative thoughts or maybe a negative perception with a specific commander when they lose to it a lot. And so it's been
Once
nice
it's already
for us
gone way too far, right? Once you've already burned that bridge and no one ever wants to see your Torment of Hailfire ever again, you've you have to go really far before people actually internalize that in the way that you can see much earlier in the data.
Exactly. And so when you look at some of the most popular commanders of all time, like Kenrith the Returned King, which is fairly new, came out with Throne of Eldraine, or Atraxa Praetor's Voice, or even Edgar Markov. These commanders sometimes get a rap where it's like, oh, I hate playing against this because it's really good, but it's because it's very popular and they're consistent. They've got a lot of abilities. They allow you to play in a large range of colors. And so it's been nice for us to see, is my crazy wizard untapping deck winning a lot, or is it not really winning at all? Or is my weird Naya Minsk beloved ranger from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms even good? Has it won once? So that's really why we've started tracking with, so we can see, are we the bad guy, or are we just having a good time and we're getting lucky?
Do you feel like this sort of process of tracking your games actually, what I'm wondering is, even if you're not willing to go to that length of having that hard data, does it just change the way you think about the game a little bit? And when you're approached with one of these situations, like, do I actually hate that commander? You might just think more concretely back on, well, have I actually lost to it that many times? Or is there some other aspect of that commander that's why I'm having this negative reaction?
I think so. I think that I'm able to look back now, and we track turn order, we track which commander came in first, second, third, and fourth, and I know there's really no first, second, third, and fourth place, but as far as...
there is. There definitely is. There's no question about
you collect the data you can, and what it means is up for interpretation
Absolutely.
later.
So we certainly have been able to look at which commanders have won and which commanders were taken out first, so essentially fourth place, and we definitely tried to evaluate whether or not there was some correlation with commanders that people think are problematic or that we just don't like to play against, because I will target against a deck that I know is going to, Atraxa, if I know I'm playing against someone's deck that's going to start just wiping the board, or it's going to win with Infect, I may target it for a little while. And if you see it came in fourth, it's possible that they were coming out of the gate strong and they had to be, taken down a notch.
When you say you keep track of which players got knocked out first and who won, I'm like, all right, well, obviously the best deck got knocked out first, and the second best deck won, and the third and fourth ones were the middle decks, basically.
I love that you said that, because a lot of people think that the winner was the person who was in second, the person who was in fourth is the strongest deck, and third and second place were along for the ride. But I really feel like sometimes the second place person was the most problematic. Fourth is if you really had either a really bad showing or you're hot out the gates. Mike, do you
maybe
agree
you're just
with
a
that?
jerk and everyone targets you? You know,
Oh, could be.
Everyone's like, can Debbie please leave? Let's just get this person out of the pod.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely examples of both. I know I have decks where I've become the arch enemy very quickly, in which case, you know, you see my deck being eliminated the first every time, and with the mindset of, oh, that might be the worst deck eliminated first or the best deck eliminated first. It is still kind of difficult to gauge your power level after some statistics like that until you start playing those decks in a little bit higher power stuff. But at the same time, I've had like a Karuga companion deck where I wasn't doing anything until turn 3 or 4 because of the restriction of the Karuga companion. And that just makes it so everyone can swing at me early. And on turn 3, I can only get one blocker out. And if someone has a menace creature or a flying creature I'm not going to get, they're going to keep hitting me for a little bit more damage. And before I even start playing the game, I'm already at 30, 25 life, something like that. And it might just be coincidence that I die first because someone has an aristocrats deck and there's Zulaport cutthroating everyone to death.
Yeah, they're not targeting anybody. They're just their deck doing its thing, and you die as a consequence.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
Well, this gets to, I think, the most interesting bit of this to me, which is that, you know, we do a lot of data-related stuff at Lucky Paper, too. And there's a lot of data-related stuff going on in Magic more broadly. We've talked about 17 lands on the show and the actual, like, tracking of very specific draft data in very, very large data sets where you actually have some sort of, you know, statistical significance, where you have enough data to really start to come to some rock-solid conclusions. And I don't think what you're doing or what we're doing at Lucky Paper is the same because, you know, you're looking at a game where there's 4 players involved. There's obviously all the variance inherent in Magic, but there's also all these other factors, right? Who got targeted? Why did they get targeted? There's all these kind of soft things that are hard to actually track in the data. And so my impression is that, like, the win percentage of your deck is not necessarily indicative of the power level of that deck per se, but what it is indicative of is how often that deck wins, and that is kind of what matters, right? Like, we do these surveys where we ask people what they're including in their cubes, and we get a few hundred responses, you know, every set, and we ask people just to tell us how excited they are to put that card in their cube, how long they think it's going to be in their cube for, which is not a question of power level, right? It's just a subjective question of just how much do you like this card and think it fits with the goals of whatever cube you're talking about. And the result is not this, like, objective, we don't have enough data points to, like, categorize the objective power level evaluations of cards. It's not even really what we're asking. But it's still this interesting perspective on the game, which can totally change how you think about it. And to me, that's what your data tracking is for sure. Like, if you play 12 games with the deck, you can get mana screwed in 4 of them, and then it just looks like the deck is horrible, but actually that was just variance. If you play 1,000 games with the deck or something, then a different number will be borne out. Sure. But the reality is that you're not going to play 1,000 games with that deck. It's going to change. You're going to put more cards in and out. And so you're really just using this as a perspective to, like, change how you think about the game and inform how you improve your decks. And importantly, in Commander, too, how you talk about them with the table, right? Like, this is a deck that is historically strong or is not historically strong or whatever. It all kind of contributes to this, like, subjective data analysis, which I think is kind of what we do a lot of at Lucky Paper. And it sounds like what you're doing at Guardian Project Podcast, too. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think
like we have a lot of pedants in our audience, and I can just imagine people being like,
so we're doing some defensive podcasting.
I can just imagine
here.
people being like, oh, you know, you tracked 15 games you played with one commander, and then tried to derive, like, some statistically significant power level from those games, and, like, that's really not what you're doing. You're just saying this deck won a few too many times, and why? Who knows? Is it because of fast mana? Is it because I didn't have the turn 0 conversation correctly? Is it because I was targeted, or because I wasn't targeted? Or there's all kinds of variables that you can't really pin down. But it still gives you a perspective into what you're going to change about that deck moving forward. To change one of those knobs to adjust something to, again, optimize for that fun experience.
Yeah, we'll be able to correlate those changes and things along with one of the stats that we do track is, you know, the dates that we play certain games and whether you're using, I think
how many drinks you've had before the pod begins.
Yeah,
that might
decision making.
That might be a note that we make in our extra comments section or something about a particular game. If we get dumpstered on a particular game where, if you look at the decks, you go, I'm playing a graveyard deck and everyone's making me mill. How did I lose this game? And then it says in the comment section, had 6 beers before game started. Okay, maybe that makes sense.
There's an interesting correlation between this is the deck I like to play late at night and keep
there's a few more factors, that we started tracking this year, whether or not we thought we had a successful pregame chat, right? Was everybody honest? Did we think that went over well? I track whether or not that I played the game on stream. So we do stream on Twitch. We do guest on other streams. And I do know that we want to chat with people. I am engaged with our chat, so I may not be looking at all of my outs, I guess, from a competitive perspective. But I also want to make flashy plays, right? You always want to show off a really cool play. Is the smart play maybe overloading a Cyclonic Rift? I do, in fact, run the card that everyone hates, and I will overload it. Maybe. But have I instead just returned one thing because I didn't want to be that person?
Ruin the stream?
Yeah, I've also done that. And we also track turn order. We have not seen that turn order necessarily matters, at least as far as our games have gone. But we do want to, see whether or not we go first. I have a deck, Finn the Fangbearer from Kaldheim. It's a pseudo, I'm using air quotes right now, pseudo infect deck. You give poison counters when a death touch creature deals damage. If it goes fourth, it has a significantly harder time winning. If it goes first, it might have a better time. So we track game notes as well. Although it's all freeform text, it's really hard to query. We can't track every single piece of interaction that happened in a game, but we try to do our best to explain that story so that when we're looking back to talk about our stats episodes, we're able to say, oh, okay, this person won with Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond, and it happened on turn 6. And did they do the thing the commander wanted it to do? I don't know. They just played the 2 mono black cards that create an infinite win. Or you say, yeah, we got wrecked because someone dropped 4 Eldrazi and they started annihilating us out of the game. And it's like, that's a much nicer story to tell than someone who might be a little disappointed if they hear that you just won from an infinite combo. So I think we play games differently if we're on stream, and I think we play games differently when we're with our friends. So we can only speculate and we can only try to derive reasoning from our notes, but it's been wild tracking these. And it's a lot of work, but we're going to continue to do it, I think.
I guess maybe a better way to get across the convoluted point I was trying to maybe get to earlier is that, if you look at 17 lands, like, their clear goal is break this format, right? Like, solve it. Like, figure out what the best decks are, the best cards, like, get a, reasonably, solid, rank order pick list. And, that's not what you're trying to do with your data, right? You're not like, well, let's clearly, rank all of my decks from most powerful to least powerful and just, make these objective evaluations about the decks. You are using it kind of like it's data in the sense that it's got numbers in it and it's consistently formatted, but it's kind of like a diary almost of it's a journal of the commander games you're playing, and then you're using that to inform your very subjective adjustments to your decks to try and improve your game experience and just have more of the kind of games you want to have for all the various things you're tracking, as opposed to let's break commander, let's solve it, right? Let's just get to the bottom of all the things that matter and find the best thing.
It does sound like it is useful in optimizing that experience, though. When we talk about optimizing for a fun game of commander, right. I definitely feel that same experience of just showing up at the table and saying, yeah, my deck is a 7, just like every other deck. So actually having some perspective on an objective way to think about the power level of decks seems just awesome and extremely practical.
Yeah, I guess another way to compare this to is in the cube world, I have had other cube designers look at my cube and say, clearly Lurrus is the best thing to do in this cube. How can you justify having Lurrus in this cube? It's just too good. Lurrus decks are going to be always present and they're going to have a really high win percentage. And I would you could show me, you could make 20,000 people draft my cube on 17 lands and play a bazillion matches and show me the objective data and prove to me yes, actually this card does have an objectively high win percentage, right? And maybe that's the case. That's the argument this person is essentially making. Their assessment is that if you were to do this time-traveling supercomputer nonsense and figure out the objective power level of the card, it would be above the rest of the cube. I'm saying my subjective experience playing this card with my play group is that it's fine. It doesn't win all that much. It's just as good as any other card, and it's totally normal. And that's what matters. Right.
I mean, in both cases, the data is useful, but only to inform your subjective experience and inform the kinds of conversations you have.
Right. My actual experience playing my cube is what matters, not this objective power level you could derive from 17 lands data and demonstrate to me. And so that's to me the fundamental difference in goal of what you're doing with the data, right? If you're better capturing your subjective experience so that you are removing some bias from it of terms of what you remember and just trying to get a better grasp on what's actually going on in your playing experience, then that seems very helpful to me. I wouldn't say we're critical of, but like there are definitely downsides, I think, to trying to break Magic in a like 17 lands kind of way that I think changes the way the game is played in a way that is why we like Cube, because you can't break Cube that way, basically.
I mean, yeah, let's not say that we're critical of it. Let's just say that's not the fun part for us.
It's definitely not the fun part of Magic to me. I got way off track there. This is what it's like podcasting me. I just go all over the place. I can't be contained.
Well, I feel
want to go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, if you have something to say, you should definitely go, because I should not keep talking.
I was going to say that it's a lot easier for us to make those evaluations by ourselves, because even I guess in Cube and in Draft, there's going to be 8 people in the draft, and you're not necessarily going to see that same card, where if I bring my same deck to the same table, I'll always see that card every time, and I'll be able to make that determination subjectively even more, because I'm the one that's always playing it, and I can see other people's reactions to that card.
I want to get into these Rule Zero conversations, because frankly, I fail at these. I do not know how to describe. I have one commander deck left. I don't know how to describe the power level of it to people. I'm like, it's goblins. I'm gonna try and kill you with 1/1s. There are a couple of combos in there. One of them is like kind of efficient. The other ones are like ridiculously convoluted. I need like 6 pieces in play. But I'm the kind of person.
And you actually had this conversation. So my question is, how did Andy do?
Yeah, I guess we played on stream once. So how did I do in terms of describing my deck? And more broadly, like, how does one have a reasonable Rule Zero conversation where everybody doesn't just say my deck is a 7?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think you did a good job. I honestly do.
Mm-hmm.
We did get to see your deck.
Thank God.
We did get to see your deck pop off. So head over to our YouTube channel. You could probably see one of those. Spoiler alert. I think we took on some new questions to discuss, and we, at least for our stream, we've started looking at it from we have a 3-hour time slot. We'd like to get 2 games in. So looking at it from a timing perspective versus what does your deck specifically do has, I think, maybe changed a lot for us over the last couple of months here. So we aim for games that are going to be between an hour to an hour and a half. An hour-long Commander game is pretty quick. You're probably going to end on turn between 6 and 8, which doesn't seem like very many turns have gone by, but it's enough. Maybe on the high end, an hour, 45 minutes, and then we have to maybe up the power level for game 2. But I think we've started by asking everybody, how long does your deck usually take to win? I think
in terms of turns?
In terms of time. So not necessarily turns. So I don't know if I could explain, even with some of the decks that I have, what turn I can win, but I know it usually takes an hour and a half for me to get there. Which is interesting, because I don't look at my commander decks and say, okay, if I get this on turn 1 and I can ramp to here on turn 2, my commander on turn 3. I personally am not a deck builder or brewer in that sense, but I can tell you that my fast Wizard X spell deck is probably going to take everybody out maybe on turn 9. But it's probably going to take me an hour and a half to get there with the amount of thought that I have and the other players. So we've been asking how long time-wise people's decks take to play, but there's a few questions that we've adopted, like how many fast mana rocks are you running? So how many tutors are in your deck? Do you run, and how many free interaction spells? So our free spells, Force of Wills, Force of Negations, the free commander spells that came out with the Ikoria commander. There's a Fog, there's an Exile, a Redirect with Deflecting Swat. And then we ask, how many game-ending combos do you have that involve 3 or less cards? So those are really what we've been doing recently, and we've been finding that it has been very successful on our stream. Now, Mike tracks the number of turns that have passed for each player in a game. And why don't you expand a bit more on that as well? Because we found that, I think you said recently that it's been around 8 turns for all of our streams with other content creators who are versed in these pregame discussions.
Yeah, the only exception, there was one week that we had, I think, a 10-turn game and then a 5-turn game. So it still came out to be like an average of 7.5 turns for the 2 games.
Was that my week?
But
I don't think it was.
I think when you were on, we did have a 7-turn game and an 8-turn game.
There you go, right around the average,
right around the perfect amount.
Nice median length game.
And it's something that we looked at for the amount of time that each turn takes. A lot of times turns 1 through 4 are going to take a half an hour, and then turns 5 through 6 are going to take an hour or whatever. If 5 through 7 are going to take an hour because you have more mana, you're going to cast more than one spell per turn and all that. But even in terms of length of game, how much length of game do you need to win? That kind of encompasses both people who are playing infinite combos that are going to, I'm going to have it on turn 7, my infinite combo, and if someone can stop me, they can stop me. Or an aristocrats deck that is going to ping you down every turn, starting on turn 1 all the way up to turn 8 or whatever. And it's like, hey, if no one interrupts me from turn 1 to turn 8, yeah, okay, you're all going to die by turn 8 then. But that kind of helps you look at the length of the game. But it still ends up being around the same amount of turns. People talk about like the battle cruiser style, which is like the opposite of CEDH, where people are just trying to play as many cards as possible, all their favorite cards, and just shove them on the battlefield. And those games could go 15 turns, but 15 turns is going to be a 3-hour game. There's no doubt about it, or even longer than that, perhaps. But it's something that people don't consider, and something, people are often taken aback when they say 7 turns. It's not a lot of turns. That's crazy. But then you look at the board state after 7 turns and you see that Mr. Mangold has like 20,000 goblins, and he's going to sacrifice them all to a goblin bombardment.
It's really
kill
frustrating.
Yeah.
I have one tip for your local commander play group, which is have more than one commander deck. I currently only have the one, and so it's like, if you're playing against me, it's just the one experience you're getting. I need a little more range, I think, to my options.
We can send you suggestions. We know it's fun to play against.
Ooh,
and in
I like
fact-
this. We can do a little what do you call it? A makeover, a commander makeover.
There we go.
So we did get
pimp my deck.
So I really appreciate this sort of shift in perspective. Like I definitely always would have thought that the actual length of game in terms of turns is the most important thing. But, from a game design perspective, we often talk about how that's not really the critical thing in games of Magic. The important part is sort of the decision space and the density of different decisions. And time really seems like a good way to summarize, how many different decisions and actions are you taking in a game. So that's a really interesting change in perspective.
We know that Mike isn't going to pull out his Shirei Shizo's Caretaker deck on stream, which is fine. It's a very great deck. It's very cool to see what it does, but unfortunately, he's looking to create a sack outlet and then return creatures from his graveyard to the battlefield because of a Shirei trigger every turn.
He's taking 4 turns every turn,
Yes.
every cycle of the table.
And it's adding 15 minutes per turn cycle, and not because he has decision paralysis, but he's got 5 things he has to resolve every
Quite the
turn.
opposite. He's successfully making many, many, many decisions.
That's right.
Yes.
I feel like I had this problem with I recently took apart my Druids deck, but I loved that deck.
You took it apart.
I took it apart for this new green-white deck. But the
guess that
problem
makes
was
sense.
it didn't really have a win condition. The point was to get all the lands together. I'd get all my Druids and then take everyone's lands, and then technically I could assemble all the lands and then make a Helix Pinnacle or something. But the point was just to take as many game actions as possible, and I didn't like it. It was just not a good game of Magic.
Hey, Andy and Mike, could you just let me know, is it generally fun for your opponent to steal all of your lands in a game of Commander? Is that like on the list of
Is that
normally
good?
fun
Is that a
stuff?
good thing?
I think it's
Well-
usually not, but
Normally not.
Oh, interesting. So, okay. I mean, now that you say it, I do think maybe letting your opponents continue to play Magic might be more fun, but that hadn't occurred to me before.
listen, I played a Lavinia Azorius Renegade stacks deck that had knowledge pool lock, so no one but me could really play the game, and I didn't have a fast way to win. That deck is no longer together after Mike said, I'm done. I said,
Yeah.
This is fair. This is fair. Okay, fine, sure.
It's sort of reassuring. Like I feel like I've been faced with a couple ultimatums in the cube world as well. Along the lines of you have to take this card out of this cube, or I will never play with you ever again.
Those definitely amp up as the drinks are flowing and the night gets on later. We don't have that many ultimatums about the first cube we draft, but then we have dinner in the second cube we draft. There's tend to be a lot of ultimatums about.
That's actually a really interesting parallel because, like we said on our stream and stuff, we always play 2 games. And as much as we have a pregame conversation, we also have a postgame conversation, like Andy said, about what went right, what went wrong. And it makes the second game even more tuned to exactly what the entire pod does because everyone now knows what everyone meant by their pregame conversation for the first game.
So it sounds like you're having a much more robust pregame conversation that is not centered on a specific number you're assigning to your deck, but is instead centered on these particular metrics and axes that you have found are like the best, most concise way to communicate intended power level or intended length of game that basically make that conversation about more substantial things.
Yes, and I think that the number 1 to 10 was a good starting point for maybe the overarching group of Commander
I don't think
players.
it was a good starting point. I'll say that.
For people
I'll be
who are
less
not
charitable. I
as
think it's a bad
involved,
idea.
for people who are not as involved in Magic, they are not content creators. They're playing a few times a year. That might provide them some success, but we found it wasn't really helping us because, like, it's the joke. Every deck's a 7, but I have a blue-white deck, and I say it's a 6, and people are like, "How's this a 6?" And I said, "It's not winning before turn 10. It's full of board wipes. It's not a 7." And I can sometimes it's definitely not a 7. And if it's not a 7, it's not an 8. So
data points for why my deck is a 6. Well, all these cards, and also it's not a 7. So clearly it has to be a 6. That's the only number left.
Exactly.
That's what it has to be.
And it's
But
not
you're
a 5.
that even the metric of what turn does your deck win on, like, isn't necessarily appropriate to all decks, because a lot of decks are not technically winning in the same way on the same turn.
Right, and if you take
Right.
infinite turns, you're like, my deck won the game on
It
turn
wins on turn
150,000. I took all of them, but sure.
Sure.
Right, my Druid's deck won whenever you chose to concede to me having all your lands. It's up to you.
So my last question here, it kind of ties this all together. So it strikes me that, these pregame conversations are important to make sure that everybody at the table is at a reasonable power level band. You don't have any like big outliers in terms of a much better deck or a much worse deck. And then you're also tracking this data to determine which of your decks are winning too much and need to be like powered down a little bit. I do want to also sneak in here just the fact that I think most people probably feel like they're losing too much if their win percentage overall is 25%, even though it's a 4-player game, right? Because I think people expect to win more, right? Like you think, I should be winning about as much as I'm losing. But if you're winning 50% of the games you're playing in a 4-player game, that's not at all equal. So I'm curious to know how, if you get to the end of a game or you get to the end of 12 games with the deck and you determine that, okay, this deck is overperforming, how do you decide I'm going to make the deck worse, or I'm just going to start telling people the deck's better and thus upping the power level of my opponents, presumably, by having them pull out better decks against me? Like, how do you decide that, right? Like, when do you know to nerf a deck versus just start talking about it differently?
I think for that second question, it just ends up being personal preference on whether or not I'm willing to take some of the cards out of the deck that are making it stronger, and if I want to keep it exactly the same way, or do I want to play it in a more... I mean, the closer you could get to a true power level 7, the more diverse decks you're going to get to play against, and that's what we like to do. But if I have my She-Ray deck that I'm never going to get to play on stream, and I can put in fast mana like Mana Crypt and Grim Monolith that Andy's gonna gift to me for my deck.
It's so generous of you, Andy. I'm so glad that Andy decided to do that.
I'm such a good friend.
We've got it documented and recorded. It's on wax, so you've got this to point back to.
But that way I can play my lesser seen 5-mana mono black commander that cares about creatures power level 1 or less in an 8 power level, because I'm going to be able to get She-Ray out on turn 2 and start edicting my opponent's boards all the way away with a Grave Pact or something like that. And it's, if that's the way that I want to play that deck, then that's the power level I'm going to keep it at. And I am going to ask other people to bring stronger stuff out and to never play Rest in Peace in their decks ever.
and with
Leyline of the Void is banned.
And with Rionia Fire Dancer that I mentioned earlier, I had no issue taking out that fast mana because I wanted to make sure that the deck worked right away. I realized it was just a little too powerful, so once I backed off with the fast mana and I put in some either slower mana or just some more creatures in general, and I was playing at a more conservative pace, I guess, on par, I did not mind bumping that one down as opposed to saying this is definitely an 8 or a 9, or I guess even a 10, some might say, because I had a Mana Crypt and a Grim Monolith. It definitely wasn't on par with what another 10 would have looked like. But I said, instead I'm just going to bring this one way down, and that's kind of how we did that. And I did start to see, at least last year with the stats, that win rate backed off, at least for my deck, over the last, I think, 2 months of the year. And I played it quite a few times last year.
And I've been playing with some more brand new players that I'm trying to adopt into our Commander environment and our Commander community. And they're coming...
You got to rope-a-dope a little bit. You just got to lose the first 12 or 18 matches, make them feel like, I love this game, I'm so good at it. Then you bring out the heavy hitters.
So that's the thing, is they
get them hooked.
They're used to playing sealed and draft just against each other, and they're very competitive. And they said it's hard to play a game like Commander and be okay with not winning. And so you have to play Commander with the mindset of you're there to have a fun time. Like we've said many, many times already, it's a social game and you're there to have fun and see cool card interaction. So that's aimly what we aim for.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you two wanted to say on the episode? Is there anything we didn't get to that you want to talk about?
Oh, I wanted to mention, although you have one deck, Andy, that you think, you want to bring multiple decks in order to fit with multiple
To be fair,
formats.
I had a Golos deck and then they banned it.
Sure.
We'll talk about that on our next episode, but that's why I play Cube. Because ain't nobody can ban something from my Cube. It hurts when they ban a card.
For sure. But even I've had some decks. I played mono black Commander for a very long time. We talked about my Sidisi deck, but then I would replace it with Kokusho, the Evening Star, or some other degenerate mono black Commander that I love playing. But that's the thing. And I got to see your deck list, and I looked at, your deck does play strong goblins, plays some strong ramp in there and everything. And I love that you have Grenzo as your commander and not Kranko as your commander. But Kranko was in the 99. Because if Kranko was your commander, I believe the power level of your deck immediately goes up.
Yeah, but then I'm just doing the same thing every single time. What I love about the deck is I get to make my opponents kill each other and cast their cards. I get to do different stuff every time I play, pretty much.
And that's the perfect way of deck building, that the same way that we look at it. It's not just
Anthony's
about
over here rolling his eyes. It's not that different. You're always just playing
I would
goblins.
just say I feel like conspicuous Snoop cut down on the number of different kinds of endgames with that deck.
Sure.
Hey, there's one very good endgame now.
Yep.
Can you not kill a 2/2? Can you not kill a little 2/2, Anthony?
I couldn't.
You know what?
Everyone, narrator, and he could not.
How are you going to cast your 2/2 when I have all your lands? That's all I'm going to say.
But there are certain decks that you could just change the commander with and change the power level. And if someone says, "Hey, I want to play a higher power level game," I'm going to play the same deck, but I'm going to have Kranko as my commander, and we're going to see exactly how well this deck goes with no changes whatsoever.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like maybe I just have a different approach to Commander, where all the decks that I build are very focused on the Commander itself. And I feel like just swapping in a different Commander, it wouldn't adjust the power level. It would make the deck completely non-functional.
Sure. I guess in this particular instance, it is a goblin-themed deck with a goblin commander that doesn't care about goblins.
Right. So it's in a space where there's some redundancy, and that
There
you
would
actually
definitely
have
be
options.
some cards that would not at all make sense in a Kranko deck that are very good in the Grenzo deck. Specifically, like the weird evasive enchantments that just make it easier to get in with little dinky 1/1, so you can trigger
Choose the left
Kranko.
side of the river or the right side of the river.
Grenzo. You have Raging River, of course. Still so sad you can play Raging River on stream. That card is so dumb. I just wanted to cast that dumb card on stream. But no, yeah, there's definitely a spectrum, and I can definitely see designing a deck specifically to say, I want to design a deck that's like a Transformer deck where I can put one commander at the helm and it's a much more powerful deck, or I can put a second commander at the helm and the cards are all still relevant, but it plays with a different strategy and is much more fair. So
and
I can totally see that.
I guess that kind of thing does only work with like a broad strategy, like a mono black reanimator deck. I could have Shieldred as my commander, or I could have something that I want to reanimate as my commander, like a Kokusho, the Evening Star. So there are.
And I was
niche
whining.
cases.
I was whining and crying when I took apart my Golos deck, but it was secretly just a Jeskai Ascendancy deck, and I could have just put any other 5-color commander at the helm, but then I'd have to be admitting to myself that I was just putting a random 5-color commander at the helm and it had nothing to do with the commander, which I couldn't bring myself to do.
And you really you could have kept that deck together and just made sure that you had really good pre-game conversations about how Golos isn't the most broken 5-color commander in the world.
Yeah, rule zero it in. We've played against, I think, Mike, you said last year, you played against Golos more after the banning than before the banning.
Yeah, and the particular conversations I had, I think it was like a mono black Golos deck, and I'm like, I want to see this. I have no problem.
I just have Golos to get Urborg and Cabal Coffers, basically.
This sounds familiar.
Or a Torment of Hailfire? Disgusting.
Oh, man, I have a new deck that I need to go brew.
Same. I'm going to go build Braid's Cabal minion and put a recurring nightmare in there. It's
I
be
will
a fun
play
time.
with you. I will play with you.
See, this is the thing, is secretly my heart in multiplayer games is totally with stacks. I just want to play stacks in multiplayer formats, and I know it's not fun, which is why I don't do it. I just have the Goblin deck, but that's where I want to be. I just want to build like 3-color partner blood pod stacks, basically, is my like ideal deck for the kind of Magic I enjoy the most. But that's not fun for everybody. So
I
Hey,
had
if
no
we
idea.
come prepared, then everybody's on the same page. It's hard to do that when someone doesn't have a deck prepared to play against a blood pod or any sort of stacks deck. But if you prepare ahead of time, we can have a deck ready, and you can play your favorite kind of Magic with us.
see, look at this generous spirit these people have, Anthony. This is great. I need my local play group to be this generous of spirit and heart.
This is what we're foreshadowing, where it's foreshadow pregame discussion. That's what's happening right now. Yeah, for
There you
games
go.
way in the future.
Mm-hmm. For commanders that don't exist yet.
Sure.
Well, Andy and Mike, thanks for being on this episode of the show. You know, we wanted to have you on because, again, we were really struck by how you talked about Commander and how it was unlike how I had heard any other content creators talk about Commander before, right? Even though this is a social format and really everybody should be optimizing for a good time, still the vast majority of the things I hear are about making the best decks. You know, what are the coolest new combos? What are the most powerful new cards? And it was really refreshing to hear people talking about the format to really just optimize for fun. And we thought that Commander is a hugely popular Magic format, as you may or may not know. I'm sure many of our listeners play Commander, and if they like our show, they are very likely to like your show as well. So where can our listeners find you and the rest of the Guardian Project stuff?
You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. We are on all of the podcasting platforms. You can check out our website, guardianprojectpodcast.com. We stream at Guardian Project Podcast, twitch.tv/Guardian Project Podcast. And if you want to chat with us online, you can find us on Twitter at Guardian Pod, and we're also on Instagram, Guardian Project Podcast.
Do you have any specific episodes of the podcast you would recommend people start with if they have not heard your show before and have not heard the way you talk about Commander?
So the big stats episode, the one that you mentioned, was episode 134. So that was all of our stats for 2021. We also did an episode that we got a lot of really good feedback on, which was episode 120, which was talking about the most affordable Commander deck themes. So if you're looking to get into the format, you aren't playing today, or want another deck, we talk about some of the more affordable Commander themes that you can build around because they're staples, I guess, quote unquote. The more popular cards to play in those are not that expensive.
We also did the most expensive ones in case you are really, really rich.
Did you really do a most expensive ones too?
Yeah,
Yes,
if you are Scrooge McDuck and you're currently swimming in your pool of coins, check out that one. I think that one was it was either one before or after.
Evolve power artifact.
It probably just involves Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, I assume, in Commander.
It's legal in Commander.
That's definitely legal in Commander. You don't see it
Wild.
much. I can't imagine why.
Oh, who knows?
It's a combination of as much as a small car and also extremely unfun to play with and against. Could be. Got to have my Tabernacle Golos deck now. Roll zero conversation. The other thing is, we're doing a little podcast swap over crossover event. So if everybody is enjoying this episode, this fun dynamic the four of us have, we're going to be on an episode of your show this week. So this episode that you're listening to right now came out on Monday. If you're listening the first couple of days, it'll come out. On Wednesday this week, there will be an episode of Guardian Project Podcast featuring Anthony and I. We will talk about kind of the flip side. We're going to talk about Cube on the Commander show, and Commander on the Cube show is the plan.
Yes, can't wait.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And we're going to pretend like we're not just going to immediately record the episode.
We're not. No, we will talk to you in a few weeks.
Yeah, definitely a long time from now.
All right, thus concludes this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by having a nice pre-show conversation where we talk about how we're going to be talking on the show, how long we expect the show to go, what kind of words we're going to be using, those kinds of things, so we can have a nice conversation where everybody has safe expectations set. Thank you, Andy and Mike, for joining us for that conversation.
Thank you
Of
so
course.
much for having
I'm
us.
looking forward to the post-show conversation as well.
Exactly, yeah. The wrap-up. I can't
Was
believe
it
you brought up my
successful?
Druid deck.
We're gonna have much better expectations about the next episode.
Here's the other thing about your deck, Anthony, the pub stop thing.
Oh yeah,
Part of it, I think, is that, yes, maybe your deck was a little overpowered. But you've also been playing Magic for a very long time. You have an extensive collection. I also think part of it is that if you're playing against a precon and turn one you just fetch land for a Savannah, you're gonna elicit some groans from the table. People are gonna be like, "What is happening? This is not fair."
So it's actually really funny. I've been trying to play a little bit of Commander at the local game store, and I played my Wizards deck, which I adore. It's Adeliz the Cinderwind. You just make a bunch of wizards attack.
I would say it's about a 7, right?
It's about a 7. You play a Cyclonic Rift, but then you just attack people, so it's not like, just stalling the game. And I played my Snapcaster Mage, and everybody was like, oh man, you have a Snapcaster Mage. That's so cool. And then I play Volcanic Island, and no one notices.
Or they all noticed and said, that's actually not cool anymore. Now I'm just mad.
It could be that.
That's the other option.
I feel like I need to get your guys' perspective on this deck. We'll send you the deck list.
Yes.
You know how many artifacts are in this deck? One. There's one artifact. We got
Soul
no
Ring?
soul. You
Wait,
said you
let me
always
guess
play
what it is.
Soul
Hold
Ring.
on, wait.
But this deck has no Soul Ring.
What's the one
it has-
artifact in the
Guess how
Adeliz
many
deck? Don't
tutors
tell
are
me.
in this deck? There's one tutor, and it only searches for 1 mana creatures.
Wait, what's the blue-red tutor? Oh, you have Imperial.
Sorry,
Recruiter in
this
there.
is in the blue. The green-white deck.
That's in the green-white deck.
Green-white deck.
So wait,
the
which
Wizards deck is busted.
Does that only have one artifact, the Wizards deck?
No, it's got plenty.
Okay, never mind. I'm not very confused.